and welcome to episode 4 of the Magners to Missionaries podcast. We're excited you joined us once again and thankful that you've been following along. Today, we want to talk a little bit about what we call pre-field ministry, and our goal and desire is to explain this a little bit, talk about our personal experiences, and hopefully give some practical advice for others who may be starting out, getting ready to start out, or already on pre-field ministry. Maybe some practical advice from things that we have learned so far. But before we get into talking about that real quick, we want to try to make our podcast a little bit more personal about us and uh, give our listeners an insight into the lives that we have going on right now. And I just want to take a minute to quickly catch up with Josh and see what has been going on lately this past weekend or so. What do you have going on uh, at the moment of our recording?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're at a very busy time of our ministry right now. So this past weekend, the Allenson family has returned here to Mexico City from their furlough that they've been on the last 6.5, 7 months. That while they were gone, Katie and I were in charge of the church here. But now that they're back, we're working on a transition period. We had a great Sunday. We had about 45 people. We ran out of chairs, which is a wonderful problem to have. So if that continues, we're going to be either needing to buy new chairs or look for a new building for the church here, Iglesia Bautista Fado de Luz. Really exciting about that. This week we've got Vacation Bible School starting in just 2 days from the time of our recording. So we're looking forward to that, gearing up for that, getting all the preparation done. We've been spending a lot of extra time at the church decorating and all that kind of thing. You know how it is with Vacation Bible School. You want to make it the most fun and exciting as you possibly can. So we're praying that God will give us a great number of visitors this week that we can share the gospel with. So looking forward to Vacation Bible School this week. Luke, where are you at on your pre-field ministry? What state are you in right now?
Right now, we're actually all the way out in Iowa. We did not expect to come out this far when we started raising our support and booking meetings, but the Lord has brought us out here to Iowa. We had a nice meeting this past Sunday at a wonderful church that has a nice missions apartment for us to be able to stay in for a few days during this week, because later on this week we'll be attending a wedding of a good friend of ours here in the state of Iowa. So it's nice that we're able to stay here during this time. We're excited for that wedding coming up, being able to see some friends we haven't seen in a while and participate in that wedding. And then we also have a meeting still out here in Iowa this coming Sunday, before we make our long return trip back to the East Coast where we're used to being on.
That's one of the great things about deputation pre-field ministry is like how you can schedule, if the Lord allows, you can schedule meetings around events in your friend's life, in your family's life. Like
Yes.
Katie and I were able to do the same thing at one point. We were able to schedule some meetings around a wedding of one of my friends from college, and we were able to be in that wedding. But at the same time, we stayed in Prophet's Chambers during that week, and we had meetings around the wedding at the same time. So it's just, the Lord really blesses, it's just amazing how
it is
how
really
good
nice.
that is. Yeah. So why do we call it pre-field ministry? Because when I did it, I called it deputation, but you guys call it pre-field ministry. Can you share obviously it's the same act, it's the same thing. You're doing the same thing we did, but why call it that?
We actually struggled when we started to break our habit of calling it deputation, because we were used to calling it deputation. But when we joined Baptist Missions to Forgotten Peoples, and that's our mission board that we're with, BMFP encouraged us to stop using that word deputation so much and call it pre-field ministry, so that we would, in our own minds and heart, change our mindset of how we look at it. We don't want to have this mindset of looking at it as this daunting task of constantly making phone calls and constantly going to churches and sharing what the Lord has called us to do, hoping that they might take us on and moving on to the next one, but rather having the mindset more of seeing it as ministry. We're in the ministry of serving God each and every day, and we're in the ministry of serving others each and every day. So as we make these phone calls and as we show up to a different church almost each service, we are desiring and trying and praying that we will have the mindset of how can we be a blessing to this church when we show up? What can we do to serve these people, to help out the pastor, and just be a blessing and serving others, not about seeing what they can do for us, but seeing what we can do for them as we try to serve them and taking advantage of this time of keeping in mind that we are in the ministry. Ministry doesn't start the day we reach 100% support and move to Italy. No, we're in the ministry right now, still serving people, sharing the gospel and everything that it may be a little bit different than
Uh-huh.
what you're going through right now in Mexico, but we're still in the ministry right now here in the States still.
Yeah, that's good. I'm really glad you mentioned that because that's in my mind, even though I didn't call it pre-field ministry when I was on my time of raising support, financial and prayer support. That's one of the things that we did face from time to time is we would hear people at churches or maybe even pastors from time to time say something like, oh, they're in the process of preparing themselves for the ministry right now. And I understand what
Mm-hmm.
their mindset is, what they're thinking, but that's not really the best way we can put it, is it? Because the
Right.
truth is that missionary is already in the ministry. They're already doing what God has called them to do because the pre-field ministry time, that deputation time, is so important for a missionary.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to talk about that today. It is so vital. And the missionary needs that time. I really believe that just based off of
Yes.
what God taught me and brought me
Yes.
through during my time of pre-field ministry of deputation. You know, it's so much more than just raising money. We have to be careful as missionaries, and Luke knows this, and I know this, that we don't go into it thinking, my purpose is to raise money, because that's not the purpose of the pre field ministry. That's not the purpose of deputation. That's a byproduct of what you're
Mhm.
doing, but
Right.
really you're there to build relationships with people, with churches, with pastors that are going to pray for you for years to come while you're on the mission field. One of the things that I would say at every single church that I went to, and if you're one of my supporting churches or even one of the churches that I visited while I was on my pre-field ministry, my deputation time, you've heard me say this. Even if I would say to the church, even if you cannot support us financially, which we understood, not every church could
Mm-hmm.
and not every church
Right.
did, and that's totally okay. But we asked every single church to pray for us. Why? Because we understood that that prayer is so much more important than the
Yes.
financial support. Luke, how do you think about that? What kind of has God been showing you during your pre-field ministry time based off of this topic?
Well, it's been very encouraging as well to be meeting people that are faithful prayer warriors.
Yeah,
And these are people we never would have even known are on this earth if we weren't able to have this process of pre-field ministry going to these different churches.
exactly.
And it's so encouraging when we're at a church and an individual will come up and will say, what can I pray for you?
Mhm.
What are some needs that you have right now? What are some struggles you're going through? What is something specific that we can keep in mind in prayer? You know, it's one thing when the pastor says that the church is a praying church and they're going to keep us in prayer. And of course, I believe them. I'm not
Mhm. Mhm.
calling them a liar. I believe that they are. But it's so much more when an individual will come up, unprompted by the pastor, unprompted from something said at the pulpit, and just meet us at our table or something, ask us something specific they can keep us in prayer for. Or maybe sign up for the prayer letter or follow us on our social media or keep in touch. I have this one man from Canada that we were in Canada, I want to say 2 months ago, I believe. And you understand, it's hard to keep track of time sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it was 2 months ago we were in Canada and met this man, this family from this one church. And since that time, probably 4 or 5 different times he has reached out to me, texting me, just seeing, hey, how are things going? I saw this on your social media was coming up in your life or something like that. You know, how's that situation coming? How's support raising going? And it's been great that they have been keeping in touch and that he specifically has been reaching out, asking how things are going. And I know that they are praying faithfully for us.
That's so wonderful to have those, like you said, those individuals that would ask you for prayer requests, things like that. I remember there was a couple different times on our pre-field ministry where we would meet a family, usually a young family with younger kids that were trying to train up those kids to love the Lord, to love missionaries, to pray for missionaries. And there was a couple different times that they would share with us about what they do with their prayer cards that they receive from missionaries.
Mm.
There's this one family that was telling me that their kitchen table, their dining room table, whatever it might be, is a glass top. And underneath that glass top, they put all of the missionary prayer cards, and they'll choose one different missionary family every single night for dinner. When they sit down as a family
Yes.
for dinner, they'll choose a missionary family and they will pray for that family. And that's just such an awesome little thing that they do, that is teaching their children to pray for missionaries and to love on missionaries. And it's just so wonderful. And it makes me think of my childhood. I don't know if you probably remember this, Luke, when we were kids, especially when you were much, much younger, but we used to have missionary prayer cards on our wall. Do you remember that,
Hmm.
Luke?
No.
No, it was probably before you were even, just when I was really, really young, and we were sharing a room at the time. So that means you
Okay.
were really, really young, almost a baby maybe. We used to have, instead of having, like, some people have sports figures, or even some
Hmm.
people have, music artists and things like that. We used to have missionary prayer cards on our wall. We had probably 100 or more missionary prayer cards with thumbtacks in the
Wow.
wall. And that's just, I loved it because I grew up with a love for missionaries and a love for missions. And I used to pick out a different missionary that I would pray for just as a little kid, and didn't really understand the impact at the time that
Right.
I would have been having on that missionary's life.
Was that in the Blue Room in Pennsylvania, or was that still when we lived in Connecticut?
No, that was in Pennsylvania. That was the first thing we had on the Blue Room when we moved to
Okay.
Pennsylvania. So how old were you when we moved to Pennsylvania? I don't remember.
I was 3 when we moved,
Okay,
and
that's
we
why.
continued sharing a room until somewhere around 7 or 8, I think. I don't remember exactly when we were able to get our own split
Okay.
up in our rooms.
Yeah. Yeah, see, sometimes I don't remember how old you really were when we, or how young you were when we moved.
Yes.
That would be why. What about the
Yes.
friendships that you're building right now on this pre-field ministry? And then I'll share a little bit about some of the friendships that have continued now that I'm on the field.
Well, this has been great too because there's been some pastors that we've come across and met at meetings that, again, we mentioned that you're not going to get support from every church, and that's fine. It, you don't want to have that mindset expecting to get support from every church, but you can also take this time to build relationships. And some of the pastors that I've been able to have communication with continuing on after the meeting we've had with them have been from churches that didn't take us on for support. There was one, and this pastor now is not in that category, but um, we had a meeting about 45 minutes from where we were living, and it was a great meeting. We really enjoyed that day. He mentioned during that meeting being able to go to a pastor's fellowship there in the state of Virginia, and that it would be great for us to be able to go to that and meet other pastors. And then shortly after the meeting we had with him, he then reached out and said, "Hey, I know that you play piano. Well, we just found out that our normal piano player is not going to be there at this fellowship I was telling you about in a couple of weeks. I was mentioning you should come. Why don't you just come to this one? And if you're able to, would you also be willing to play the piano?" And if we're like, "Yeah, of course, that'd be wonderful." And then right after that was when the housing situation came up that you mentioned in the last episode, where we had to move out of the place we were living. Didn't really know where to go, but this church had a missions house, prophet's chamber, that we were able to then reach out to him and ask if we could use it for a little while. And they were so gracious to let us stay there for a week. And I say that this pastor is no longer in the category of what we started talking about, because he actually reached out to me this morning and said they took us on for support just yesterday, and we're very thankful for that.
Oh, that's
And praise the
wonderful.
Lord for
Praise the
that.
Lord.
But there's relationships like that come out of it, where you may think, okay, well, it's just a meeting, and you go on Sunday or Wednesday or whatever, you go to present your ministry. And if you have the wrong kind of mindset, it could end right there. But if you do have the open mindset of this is ministry time, this is what can I do to be a blessing to others, and how can I build relationship and friendships with other pastors and other missionaries and so forth, then you might be able to build connections like this that would then reach out to be so much more than just that one day of meeting. How have you had some maybe similar stories or something like that?
Of course, there's a few pastors that I still talk to pretty regularly that I had met on my pre-field ministry, but also some missionaries that I had met like at missions conferences or things like that. There's actually this one missions conference, and Luke, you've had the opportunity to be at the same church, at the same missions conference, I think back in
Yes.
January of this year at Bible Baptist Church in Leola, Pennsylvania. But there was a missions conference that I was at there at that church a few years ago. I made friends with two different missionary families at that time. One missionary that is in a country over in Europe that many would call a closed country. We would call it that, a very dangerous country for a Christian to be in, that I still talk to probably every single week. Sometimes we talk to each
Mm.
other multiple times a week. And then at that same conference, I met another missionary who's down in Bolivia that I talk to all the time too, especially during this past World Cup. He and I had texted a lot during the World Cup. We were really both interested in the matches. We'd text during the matches and things like that. But it was great to have this opportunity to meet other missionaries that, were at the same stages of life as you.
Mm.
They're at the same time of raising support. So you're getting to the field about the same
Right.
amount of time. The one missionary got about a year before us, the other one about 6 months before us. So it's, really cool. You're going through some of the same life experiences at the same time. And we're just really thankful for those other friendships
Hmm.
that we have. One of the other things I really loved about pre-field ministry was learning how other churches of like faith would do ministry just a little bit different than your home church or even than your college.
Hmm.
Traveling around,
Right.
especially as you go to different parts of the country. Like Luke, you're talking about how you're in Iowa right now, right? You didn't even expect that at one point you were
No.
even ever going to go to Iowa, and now you're
Yeah.
got a couple churches down there, and you get to see how they love the Lord the same way. They believe the same thing that you
Right.
believe, and they even have the same standards and all that sort of thing. But there's little things that they do differently. So I loved one of the things would be to collect bulletins at different churches just to see how like they would organize their bulletin different than my home
That's good.
church, like those kind of things.
It's also interesting how culture is different and how you can see, like you mentioned, we're serving the same God. We love God. We're all Christians and in God's family, but it's really cool for us to be able to see the differences in the different cultures, sometimes from state to state, but certainly from bigger gaps. We're here in Iowa, we notice the Sunday how things just seem to be different out here in Iowa than what we're used to. Vivian grew up in Massachusetts. I grew up in Pennsylvania and went to college in Connecticut. We're more used to that New England, Northeast side of the United States and how things people are culturally over there. And we came out here to Iowa a few days ago and just started noticing some differences right away. We were down in Alabama and notices differences down there. But what we're trying to do as we notice the differences in culture is also see what can we learn from ministry in different cultures as well. Because we're going to be moving our entire lives to an
Right.
entirely different country where the culture is not just small differences, but much bigger differences. And the goal is still to we're serving the same God.
Exactly.
Our goal is still to see people get saved, share the gospel, preach the Bible, and all of those things, but in a different culture. So how can we learn while we're traveling here, seeing different churches, different cultures, that we might be able to use that in the future?
Yeah, because even though the culture changes and some of the practical things you may do, the Bible does not change. It's the same God that you serve. It's the same Bible that we're using as our pathway for our ministry. Man, the Lord just had taught us so many different things on our pre-field ministry. Especially, I remember right when we started our pre-field ministry, the Lord taught us very quickly how to depend on Him and not on ourselves.
Hmm.
We had started our pre-field ministry. We did 6 months of part-time and then we went full-time. And during that first 6 months, we really had a slow start. Our deputation, or what compared to what others, had. And we're going to talk about how you should not compare yourself with other missionaries, but it's a challenge that many missionaries have. We did not have a lot of meetings. I was really struggling to book meetings, and the Lord was really telling me that we needed to go full time. We needed to quit our jobs and just go headfirst into this. And at the time, we had
Hmm.
12% support, which we did not want
Hmm.
to go full time until we had like 25%. That was kind of our
Right.
goal. We had 12% support, and we had quit our jobs in right after Christmas in January. We had quit our jobs in January, and we were working at a place called Denver Cold Storage in Denver, Pennsylvania. And we loved the job. We loved where we worked. And honestly, we had made really good money where we were. The Lord had just blessed us with awesome jobs, with great bosses, but also with good finances. We were making a lot of money for what we kind of ever thought we would. So it was really hard to go from making really, really good money
Hmm.
to having 12% support and having
Yes.
almost no money coming in at the time. But the Lord
Right.
had taught us that we just need to have faith. Just depend on Him. Don't depend on your jobs. Don't depend on your finances, but just depend on me that I have a plan that I'm going to provide for you. And God really did provide. We never went without. We always had enough to make it that month.
Absolutely. We also had that struggle of starting out as well. The temptation to not quit our jobs was there as well. At the time I quit my job and went full time, we were at about 9% support. And that's rounding up the percentage. And it was a struggle, like you're mentioning, to go from the point of, okay, we have a regular paycheck coming in every week or every other week, however your normal job gets paid, to now I can't guarantee that that check is going to be there in the mail. We just trust the Lord and rely on God that that will be there, and pray that the churches will send in their support. And that was something that Vivian even struggled with as well. She kept her job for about a month longer than I did, until the Lord really made it clear to both of us that she definitely needed to quit her job. And the Lord just provided so much. But God even started providing way before this. God provided for us to be able to take our survey trip back in the fall. And this was something that we had been very much encouraged by others to take a longer survey trip than just a week or two, but take like a whole month or a couple of weeks and go visit different missionaries. And we were like, well, how are we going to be able to do this? How are we going to be able to essentially quit our jobs for a month or more and go to another continent and spend all this money? But we just knew that that's what God wanted us to do, and we trusted Him. And churches had sent us money so that we would be able to go to Europe, spend 5 weeks in Italy, spend a week in Germany, and meet many, many, many different missionaries, almost at no expense out of our own pocket because
Yeah.
God had provided. Then we came back from our survey trip, and the very next day we went to a missions conference in Florida. And it was so wonderful to be at Landmark Baptist Church in Florida. And there was a couple there that God had just put on their heart to be an extra blessing to us. And we got to know them a little bit during that week. And during that time, they asked, what is a need that we have? And we mentioned how my laptop that I had been using was just causing a lot of issues, really needed to get that replaced. They asked what this need was, and I'm thinking, well, I don't really want to mention something like that that's expensive, but maybe they'll pray, maybe they'll give us a little bit of money that we can buy a new one. But no, the next day they showed up to the place we were staying with a new laptop in hand and just gave us a laptop. And we could not believe
Yeah.
that somebody just gave us a laptop. But this is the way that God provides. God always takes care of us when we're faithful to doing what He wants us to do.
We also learned to trust in God's timing. I know that when we started our pre-field ministry, our goal was 2 years. We wanted to raise our support in 2 years and to be on the field and to start learning the language at the point that we got to the field. But it actually took us just over 3 years. So it took us a whole extra year longer than what we thought, what we had planned. And during that time, we had to learn to have patience. We just had to keep being faithful to what we knew that God wanted us to do, and just to trust Him that He is going to provide for us when it was time, when He was ready to send us to the field, because there was so much more that He had to teach us at that time. There was more friends to meet on the pre-field ministry. There was more churches to
Hmm.
go to. There was more lessons from God to learn. So we're just really thankful for the things that God had taught us on our pre-field ministry. And there's many more. We can spend a whole episode probably
Yeah.
just talking about things that God has taught us, and we'll be sprinkling through our, podcast journey here that we're on right now.
Praise the Lord that God has taught us so much and that He's continuing to teach us. One of our goals for this podcast is to also help others that are coming along. We could go on for hours talking about many different things amongst pre-field ministry, but what I think would be best is if we took a pause right where we're at and have a second episode next week talking more about some practical things, some specific things that we did along pre-field ministry or deputation, and giving some of our advice for others that are on pre-field ministry right now or about to start. And if that is you out there listening, then please don't miss next week's episode where we're going to do a part two. Please come back for that and be able to hear some of our advice that we'd love to share with you. This has been a great conversation, sharing and hearing each other's stories about what the Lord has done and how He always provides and has been so good to us throughout our pre-field ministry time.
Don't forget to send us questions. If you have any questions, email us at magners2missionaries@gmail.com. Also, you can find this podcast also on YouTube, Apple, Spotify. Go ahead and follow our Facebook page. You can find our personal Facebook pages as well. And then you can find our personal websites. Magners2Italia.com is where you can find Luke and Vivian. And then you can find Katie and I at Magners2Mexico.com. Thank you for taking the time to listen to our podcast today. Don't miss out on part 2 of our pre-field ministry next week. God bless.